August 7th, 2016, 19th Sunday in Ordinary Time.
A reading from the Book of Wisdom. The night of the Passover was known beforehand to our fathers, that with sure knowledge of the oaths in which they put their faith, they might have courage. Your people awaited the salvation of the just and the destruction of their foes. For when you punished our adversaries, in this you glorified us whom you had summoned. For in secret the holy children of the good were offering sacrifice and putting into effect with one accord the divine institution. The word of the Lord.
Blessed the people the Lord has chosen to be his own, to be his own. Blessed the people the Lord has chosen to be his own, to be his own. Exalt you just in the Lord, praise from the upright is fitting. Bless the nation whose God is the Lord, the people he has chosen for his own inheritance. Blessed the people the Lord has chosen to be his own, to be his own. See, the eyes of the Lord are upon those who fear him, upon those who hope for his kindness, to deliver them from death and preserve them in spite of famine. Blessed the people the Lord has chosen to be his own, to be his own. Our soul waits for the Lord, who is our help and our shield. May your kindness, O Lord, be upon us, who have put our hope in you. Blessed the people the Lord has chosen to be his own, to be his own.
A reading from the letter to the Hebrews. Brothers and sisters, faith is the realization of what is hoped for and evidence of things not seen. Because of it, the ancients were well attested. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. He went out, not knowing where he was to go. By faith, he sojourned in the promised land as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and maker is God. By faith he received power to generate, even though he was past the normal age, and Sarah herself was sterile. For he thought that the one who had made the promise was trustworthy. So it was that there came forth from one man, himself as good as dead, descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sands on the seashore. All these died in faith. They did not receive what had been promised, but saw it and greeted it from afar, and acknowledged themselves to be strangers and aliens on earth, for those who speak thus show that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of the land from which they had come, they would have had opportunity to return. But now they desire a better homeland, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith Abraham, when put to the test, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was ready to offer his only son, of whom it was said, "Through Isaac descendants shall bear your name." He reasoned that God was able to raise even from the dead, and he received Isaac back as a symbol. The word of the Lord.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus said to his disciples, "Do not be afraid any longer, little flock, for your Father is pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your belongings and give alms. Provide money bags for yourselves that do not wear out, an inexhaustible treasure in heaven that no thief can reach nor moth destroy. For where your treasure is, there also will your heart be. Gird your loins and light your lamps, and be like servants who await their master's return from a wedding, ready to open immediately when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds vigilant on his arrival. Amen, I say to you, he will gird himself, have them recline at table, and proceed to wait on them. And should he come in the second or third watch and find them prepared in this way, blessed are those servants. Be sure of this, if the master of the house had known the hour when the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be prepared, for at an hour you do not expect, the Son of Man will come." Then Peter said, "Lord, is this parable meant for us or for everyone?" And the Lord replied, "Who then is the faithful and prudent steward, whom the master will put in charge of his servants, to distribute the food allowance at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master on arrival finds doing so. Truly, I say to you, the master will put the servant in charge of all his property. But if that servant says to himself, 'My master is delayed in coming,' and begins to beat the men servants and the maid servants, to eat and drink and get drunk, then that servant's master will come on an unexpected day and at an unknown hour, and will punish the servant severely and assign him a place with the unfaithful. That servant who knew his master's will, but did not make preparations nor act in accord with his will, shall be beaten severely. And the servant who was ignorant of his master's will, but acted in a way deserving of a severe beating, shall be beaten only lightly. Much will be required of the person entrusted with much, and still more will be demanded of the person entrusted with more." The Gospel of the Lord.
August 7th, the 19th Sunday in Ordinary Time. The first reading comes from the Book of Wisdom, chapter 18, verses 6 to 9. The Book of Wisdom was written very late in the Old Testament period and written only in Greek, so it's not in the Jewish or the Protestant canon. It was a book that talks about the revelation of God's will. And here we specifically hear about the night of the Passover, when the people of Israel were worshiping God in secret. They were trusting in God's providence in the midst of slavery, in the midst of suffering greatly for who they were. And because they trusted, God destroyed their enemies. The second reading is from the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 11, verses 1 to 2 and 8 to 19. First of all, we hear a definition of faith. Faith is the realization of what is hoped for and evidence of things not seen. Faith is not something that's analytic, where we can figure things out exactly. Faith is a leap of trust, where we can't figure it out, but nevertheless we believe. Faith is both a gift from God and a response on our part, because first of all, God has to give us the ability to trust, but then once we have that, we do have to make that leap, because when you measure out the proofs for the existence of God, when you measure out the proofs for belief in Jesus as the Son of God, it seems to be pretty even if you take away all the prejudices with which we were raised. What tips the scale is our trust. Now, one of the difficulties with faith in the 21st century is people have forgotten how to trust. They don't trust the people around them. They don't trust people on the road. They don't trust salesmen. If we don't trust, then we'll never be able to trust God. And then the author of the letter to the Hebrews gives us an example of trust, Abraham, who trusted in God's promise even when it didn't seem as if it was being fulfilled. Abraham had received the promise for the land, but when he died, all he had of the land was one cave in which he had buried his wife. He had received the promise of many descendants, but when he died, one of his sons had been sent away into the desert, Ishmael, and the other son he almost had to sacrifice on Mount Moriah, and yet he trusted. And that's an example for us, that we have to trust when trust doesn't seem possible. The Gospel is from Luke 12:32 to 48. Jesus tells his people to trust, that they shouldn't build up treasures for themselves in treasure bags, but rather build up an eternal treasure. And so he tells them, gird your loins and light your lamps. The phrase gird your loins reminds us of the first reading, which talked about the Exodus in Israel. When people would celebrate the Passover, they would gird their loins. And so he's saying, just as those people were ready for the arrival of the angel of death, for their liberation through the hands of God, so now we have to be ready. In fact, he tells his listeners to be vigilant. They should be like that servant who, when the master returns, whenever he returns, even if he's late, the servant is fulfilling his responsibility. If that happens, the master will serve him at table. But if it doesn't happen, if the servant is beating his fellow servants, if he's not doing what the master has told him to do, then he'll be punished severely. This is a reminder that whereas God is very merciful, God is very patient, there is an accounting. There is a time when we don't have a second chance. And so today is the day we should convert and not wait until tomorrow, because we're honestly not sure that there will be a tomorrow for us. And may God bless us.